Hey, what's up, everybody? Today we're looking at Growing Up in the Ice Age, Fossil and Archaeological Evidence of the Lived Lives of Pleistocene Children by April Nowell. April Nowell is a Paleolithic archaeologist and professor of anthropology and distinguished fellow at the University of Victoria, Canada. The main ideas of this book are children, or as they're called here, subadults, in the archaeological record, and some of the findings that shed light on what their lives must have been like. We learn about things like skill learning, art, the family unit, and storytelling, as in passing information between people, maybe family members during the night by a fire. She talks about how after fire was discovered, this really changed the way that scenes like this took place and roles that could have played. The book starts out talking about why children are not discussed as much in archaeology, as well as some of the difficulties in doing this kind of work. The subject matter has a more modern, progressive feel to it, but then the rest of the book is more about discussing fossil evidence and going over the interpretations of it. Something that was apparent from the very first page is that Growing Up in the Ice Age was written in a way that I wasn't really expecting, which isn't a bad thing, but this book reminded me of reading academic sociology and social anthropology papers, but oriented to Pleistocene youth. But there are things in here that I've directly seen in classes, like aging in society, like with the differences between chronological age, social age, and biological age, things like that. But instead of talking about how these ages can change at variable rates between cultures, she's flat out talking about how the rates between different species of human change, which is a pretty interesting thing to think about. So the book is part paleontology and part cultural studies, and it's written in a very formal style. Being called Growing Up in the Ice Age, I thought the book might be more about how we dealt with trying to stay warm in a frozen land and maybe going on hunting parties to bring down mastodon to feed the tribe, and how children transition into these adult roles. And I was surprised to see that it wasn't really that kind of book. Also, what surprised me was how academically or formally styled this book was. It's no exaggeration to say that almost every other sentence in this book was a citation, many of them to April Nowell's own work as a PhD archaeologist. Now, I personally don't really like the in text citations, especially when there's such a huge amount of them. For me, it kind of disrupts the flow of the reading, but with a book like this, you do get used to it. And I prefer the end notes myself, but just know what you're getting when you read this book. Maybe you really like the in text citations. I'm a guy who I consider myself a bit of a nerd when it comes to human prehistory, but this book was geared towards somebody more serious than me. This book feels like maybe it was written for April's students or somebody who specifically studies subadults in the Pleistocene, but that doesn't mean anyone can enjoy it. Even though it took me a pretty long time to get through this book, I did find that the subject matter was pretty fascinating for the most part. What I was hoping for was a book that could really put me into these times and places, like what I feel when I read Jared Diamond, and I felt that this book did do that for me. And beyond that, some of the topics went into surprising depth, like the stuff in here on skill learning, specifically tool making and flint knapping. I mean, there's a whole thing in here that goes into detail on different knapping techniques, the different ways that stones respond to different types of strikes with different knapping tools, developing levels of skill, and when and how things can go wrong. I've read a number of books that talk about early human stone tool working, but most of them just go over the different technologies that existed in certain periods and places. This book really impressed me when it comes to things like that and skills in general, as well as art. And Things like the amount of information that can be ascertained by reading traces like footprints and finger markings on walls, it's incredible. There's a lot of detailed information in here on burial as well. We humans take burial pretty seriously, and it's one of the measures we use to assess the sophistication of other species of early humans, like the Neanderthals. One thing about this book, which I suppose kind of goes with the territory, is we're dealing with events that took place so long ago. We don't have as much evidence as we like to study, and that being the case, this book contains an awful lot of speculation. Here's an example of what I mean. April is talking about this piece of jewelry which features a depiction of a deer with its legs folded underneath it, and the general consensus is that the deer was killed on a hunt. But April speculates that the folded legs may actually be the deer leaping in the air. You see what I mean? This isn't like physics where you can just go do tests and figure out what's going on. We're forced to make these guesses and compare things with maybe an undeveloped human settlement today to try to shape our idea of what's going on. But it really is a lot of guessing. And I mean, there's a lot of that in this book. Now, there is a lot of more solid stuff in here too, and it's interesting to read about different people's interpretation of the evidence. But just know that there's a lot of speculation in this book. Another good example is this stone figure that is interpreted as wearing overalls, I guess because of these two vertical lines. But to me, the lines just look like arms. I don't know. My final thoughts on this book is uh, it's quite high quality product. It's very well made, quality printing with a number of color photos and pictures. And at the end of the book, there is an appendix featuring a 173-page of subadult fossil finds from the archaeological record. This thing is very impressive. You've got the individual, the species, the country it was found in, the context of the find, the age of death or at death, associated artifacts, the associated dates, and of course the reference. It really is pretty cool and maybe one of the selling points to this book. And speaking of selling, despite enjoying this book, I do think that it's pretty overpriced, and that may just be because it's so academically oriented, and as such, the presentation is very dry, though some of the descriptive imagery and scene setting should keep you going, but it's expensive for a book. This book was a gift for me, so thanks, Mama. I really did like the book. Okay, that's it for this one, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you have any books in this field that you like and what you thought about them. Anything on paleoanthropology or human prehistory. I'm always looking for good stuff in that field. And if you don't mind shelling out a few extra bucks for an in-depth look into subadults in the archaeological record, check out Growing Up in the Ice Age by April Nowell.